Hello, and welcome to A Perspective on Crime, a podcast that explores contemporary research in criminology. Courtesy of the artist Banksy, middle-class, middle-aged white dads like myself now consider graffiti worthy of our appreciation. I know how desperately sad we are. It's pathetic really, but two key factors dictated this. The first is there were such emotionally crippled man-children that we refused to accept that we're old. Secondly, and probably more significantly, when we were younger, graffiti was a whole lot less interesting. Toilet walls carried biro renderings of a long-nosed, balding man peering over a wall. Accompanied by the line, "What no bog roll," these curious, sinister characters were called Chads. Chad would find his way to the school canteen and bemoan the limited menu with a "What no pizza," spelt with a double S. In my all-boys secondary modern, in science books explaining the birds and the bees, he'd scream, "What no girls." Chads, you see, dated back to the end of the Second World War and rationing. He'd lament what no sugar, what no bananas, and what no eggs. In contemporary culture, Chad has gone the way of ration books, cast into the dim and distant past. The word, however, has taken on a new meaning. In the troubling, chaotic world where online culture bleeds into offline consequences, for some, a Chad is perceived to be a man at the top of the social hierarchy, a man unlikely to ever cry, "What no girls." Today, we dive into one of the most complex and troubling phenomena of our digital age, the world of incel extremism and the very real threat it may pose to the United Kingdom. The research we'll be discussing for this episode is a detailed paper titled "Is the Rise of Involuntary Celibacy Extremism a Threat to the Safety of the United Kingdom?" It's authored by Jonathan Jackson, Kate Oxley and Daniel Sefton and was published in October 2025 in the International Journal of Criminology and Policing Education. The word incel, short for involuntary celibate, wasn't coined in a hate-filled forum. It was first used in 1997 by a female Canadian undergraduate who created a blog for men and women struggling to form healthy romantic relationships. It was a space for support. However, over the past 2 decades, the term has been co-opted and has evolved dramatically. It's now almost exclusively adopted by predominantly heterosexual men who, as the research cites, feel isolated from society. The paper highlights how the internet was the key catalyst for this transformation. The creation of forums like loveshy.com in 2023 provided a platform for men who felt rejected. Unlike other, more supportive forums, these spaces did little to curb hate speech against women. Over time, the sites linked up with other fringe groups, creating an underground community that the paper calls the manosphere, a vast network where violent and degrading content could be shared and reinforced among like-minded individuals, free from challenge or critical thought. Within this digital space, a rigid and toxic ideology developed. The research outlines several central tenets that are crucial to understanding. First, the 80-20 theory. This is a core belief suggesting that 80% of women are only attracted to the top 20% of men. For incels, this theory explains their isolation and frames society as a brutal marketplace where they have no hope of competing. Then comes Chads and Stacys. These are the archetypes at the heart of the 80-20 theory. Chads are described as the hyper-attractive, successful men who have their pick of women. Stacys are depicted as superficial, low-morality women who will only pursue those top-tier men to improve their own social standing. These are then followed by lookism. This is a fatalistic acceptance that they have lost the genetic lottery. They attribute their failure in relationships to immutable physical factors like their height, weight, bone structure and musculature. The quartet ends with victimhood and entitlement. This pervasive theme is the complete refusal to take personal responsibility. Blame is placed externally, on women for their choices and on society for its structure. This fosters a deep sense of victimhood, coupled with a powerful and dangerous sense of entitlement to love, attention and sex. When weaved and wrangled and weighed, this online vitriol creates a pressure cooker with no release valve. In 2014, in Isla Vista, California, it finally exploded. Elliot Rodger murdered 6 people and injured 12 more. Before his attack, he released a manifesto detailing his hatred for women, his deep resentment of men who could attract them, and his all-consuming desire for revenge. The paper notes that while Rodger never used the term incel himself, his actions and writings are deeply rooted in contemporary incel ideology. He became foundational, almost revered as a figure for the movement. Rodger's attack wasn't just a tragedy. It was a proof of concept, a blood-stained blueprint that others would follow. The research details a clear pattern of inspiration. In 2018, Alec Minassassin drove a van into pedestrians in Toronto, killing 11 people. He explicitly identified as an incel and stated he took inspiration from Elliot Rodger's attack. His motivations were rooted in the same sense of romantic and social rejection. In 2021, a mass shooting landed the threat squarely in the United Kingdom, in Plymouth. Jack Davidson shot and killed 5 people, an atrocity that included the murder of his own mother. An investigation into his online presence revealed a man steep in incel ideology. He displayed intensely misogynistic views, claiming women base their choices only on physical appearance, and believed this prevented him from fulfilling what he saw as his right to have a teenage girlfriend. Davidson's writing also explored the black pill ideology. This is perhaps the most nihilistic facet of the movement. Taking the black pill means accepting the fatalistic belief that they, to quote the research, will never be able to form intimate relationships and that there's nothing they can do to change this. It's a philosophy of utter hopelessness, which, when combined with a sense of entitlement and rage, become a justification for violence. These violent acts serve as a grim proof of concept for the incel ideology. But to understand the potential for future violence, the paper says that we must look at societal conditions that allow this movement to grow. So, we have the ideology, and we have the violence it inspires. But why is this happening now? And why is it finding such fertile ground here in the UK? To answer these questions, the research paper argues we have to look beyond the online forums and analyse the wider societal and technological currents that are feeding it. The first major driver identified is the continuing, unregulated expansion of social media. These platforms create a powerful echo chamber. For an isolated young man, an algorithm can quickly lead them from feelings of loneliness into a community that validates and amplifies those feelings, forcing the narrative of victimhood and blame. Online, these beliefs can grow and, unchallenged, harden perspectives and deepen the sense of isolation from the outside world. The paper also presents a fascinating, if disturbing, analysis of how the incel movement has reacted to positive social change. To the incel community, markers of social progress, like women outperforming men in universities or the narrowing of the gender pay gap, aren't seen as victories for equality. Instead, they're interpreted as attacks. The paper notes that campaigns like Me Too are viewed by many incels as a challenge to the discriminatory attitudes towards women. They use data on female educational outperformance and male unemployment as evidence of erosion of male dominance. In their view, female empowerment means women are no longer dependent on men for social or financial status, a negative development that makes women more selective and leaves men of a perceived inferior social status permanently excluded. Perhaps the most significant argument presented by Jackson, Oxley and Sefton is the profound and undeniable link between incel ideology and severe mental health struggles. The paper is clear that many individuals within these communities aren't just angry, they're in pain. They often struggle with depression and social anxiety, which in turn can spiral into worsening feelings of rejection and inadequacy. The ideology, therefore, becomes a form of self-medication. Instead of confronting the initial pain of depression or anxiety, it provides a simple, external target for all of that suffering: women and a society that empowers them. The research provides compelling data to back this up. It cites a 2022 survey by Muscalanca and colleagues, which examined 274 members of the incel community. The findings were staggering. 85% of participants believed they had experienced some form of depression. 94% reported experiencing anxiety. These figures in the paper are described as remarkably high when compared to nationally representative surveys. But what makes this especially relevant to the United Kingdom is a separate study highlighted in the paper. Research conducted by Jackson et al. In 2023 found that there are rising levels of psychological distress across the UK. Critically, the steepest increase was found among 18 to 24-year-olds, the exact demographic most susceptible to incel ideology. Between December 2021 and 2022, the percentage of young adults in this age group reporting psychological distress rose from 13.6% to over 20%. This is a crucial data point. It suggests that the pool of vulnerable young men, those struggling with the very mental health issues that make incel ideology appealing, is growing within the UK. This elevates the issue from a niche online subculture to a significant public health and safety concern. With a clear understanding of the ideology and the factors driving its growth, the paper asks, how should authorities respond to such a complex and multifaceted threat? The challenge, they say, both for policymakers and law enforcement, is immense. It is a threat that is such a thoroughly entwined crisis between mental health, online hate speech, and violent extremism. The paper delves into this strategic dilemma, examining the current UK response and comparing it with international approaches. There is an ongoing debate in the UK about how to classify the incel movement. The paper clarifies that while it may not be officially designated as a terrorist threat, its online behaviour frequently meets the UK's official definition of extremism, which is the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on violence, hatred or intolerance. This definition gives UK counter-terrorism policing a mandate to act. Referrals related to incel ideology to the government's Prevent programme, a strategy aimed at stopping people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism, are currently low, at just 1.2% of all referrals. However, the paper points out a telling statistic. These referrals have the highest adoption rate, a staggering 68%, to the Channel Panel, the multi-agency process for handling the most serious and high-risk cases. This indicates that when the risk is identified, authorities take it very seriously. Beyond counter-terrorism, the paper notes that the UK's Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, VAWG strategy, offers another powerful framework. Incel ideology directly promotes attitudes and behaviours that constitute gender-based violence, encouraging control, abuse and the objectification of women. The Violence Against Women and Girls agenda provides legal and social tools that can be used to challenge the ideology's spread in both online and physical spaces. Broadening its analysis by looking at how other nations are handling this threat reveals a lack of universal approach. A comprehensive study of the UK and Sweden found that while the UK had greater parliamentary engagement in the topic, Sweden had a clearer integration between existing counter-violence extremism strategies. Australia, in contrast, had taken a more direct, hard-powered approach by officially scrutinising misogynistic violence, which ensures more resources are dedicated to tackling incel extremism as a national security threat. The authors, however, caution against a purely security-focused response. They argue that criminalising all incels, the vast majority of whom are not violent, could be counterproductive. It risks increasing what they diagnose as societal isolation, discouragement of seeking of mental health support, and pushing incels further towards radicalisation. If the problem is partly rooted in isolation and mental illness, a response that only offers handcuffs could make things worse. This leads to a different path, a roadmap out of the crisis proposed by the Radicalisation Awareness Network, an expert group funded by the European Commission. This represents the soft power alternative, advocating for a more nuanced, preventative approach that tackles root causes. Their recommendations provide a framework for healing the societal wound, providing improved training for frontline professionals like teachers, police officers and healthcare workers to help them recognise the signs, adopting an empathetic approach that acknowledges the underlying mental health issues and treats individuals with compassion rather than immediate suspicion, implementing better education for young people to demystify sex and sexuality and promote a healthy understanding of consent and relationships, finishing with educating parents on online misogynistic terminology so that they can identify and challenge it early. This multi-layered approach suggests that the most effective response is not the simple choice between policing and psychology, but a comprehensive strategy that integrates both. So, what is the ultimate takeaway from the research by Jackson, Oxley and Sefton? The core argument of the paper is that it's not a monolithic problem. It's a dangerous and complex intersection of three powerful forces: a deeply misogynistic ideology, the amplifying power of online radicalisation, and a severe mental health crisis affecting a vulnerable demographic. To view it through only one of these lenses is to miss the full picture. The research makes it clear that with rates of psychological distress rising among the UK's youth, the community of isolated young men susceptible to the ideology is likely to grow. This means that the threat, however small the number of its violent adherents may be, is not going away. Ultimately, the paper argues for a nuanced and robust response, a strategy that moves beyond simple law enforcement and surveillance. It must include proactive mental health interventions, comprehensive education to build resilience against hate, and community-based strategies for early prevention. Tackling the incel threat means tackling the isolation, the hopelessness, and the hatred at its source. That's all we have time for this episode of A Crime in Perspective. The research paper that formed the basis for our discussion today was titled "Is the Rise of Involuntary Celibacy Extremism a Threat to the Safety of the United Kingdom?" and the authors were Jonathan Jackson, Kate Oxley and Daniel Sefton. It appeared in the October edition of the International Journal of Criminology and Police in Education. A link to the paper is in our show notes, and as ever, I would urge you to read it for yourself. New episodes of the podcast will drop every week, so make sure you subscribe and please recommend A Perspective on Crime to friends, colleagues, or anyone you think might be interested. Finally, if you've read some research you think others should know about, drop me a message via the link in the show notes. If you yourself have a new work coming out and like it covered, please get in touch. But until next time, goodbye.